In October 1996, a man about to become Prime Minister stood up at his party conference and pinned his entire campaign to a car. Tony Blair called him Mondeo Man. The hard-working, aspirational voter Labour had to win back to take power. A year later, Blair won by a landslide, and people joked that a Ford estate had done what tanks couldn't, brought down a government. This was a car that earned that kind of weight. It was crowned European Car of the Year. It went on to sell 5 million units worldwide, and Britain bought more of them than anywhere else on Earth. Daniel Craig even drove one in his first outing as James Bond. Then, inside one generation, it was gone. In its best year, Britain bought almost 87,000 of them. 20 years later, barely 2,000. So how does a car that helped decide a general election disappear from British roads without a single headline? That's exactly what we're here to find out. But to understand how Britain's greatest estate car died, you first have to understand the disaster it was built to fix. Ford didn't design the Mondeo because things were going well. They designed it because the car before it had humiliated them. For nearly 2 decades, Ford's family car in Britain had been the Cortina, a simple, boxy, unthreatening thing that sat on more driveways than almost any other car in the country. It wasn't exciting, it wasn't supposed to be, it was just trusted completely and without question, the way you trust a kettle or a postbox. So when Ford announced they were replacing it, the reaction wasn't excitement, it was dread. What arrived in September 1982 looked like nothing Britain had ever put in a driveway. Rounded, smooth, almost bulbous, with flush door handles and a windscreen that seemed to melt straight into the bonnet. Ford called it the Sierra. The British public called it something else almost immediately, the Jelly Mould. One motoring magazine described it, not kindly, as looking like a blancmange evicted from its mould half an hour too soon. For private buyers, it was a curiosity. For Ford's real customer, the fleet manager, the company car scheme, the sales rep doing 40,000 miles a year, it was a problem. Reps didn't want to turn up to a client meeting in something that looked like a spaceship prop. Fleet buyers, the backbone of Ford's entire business, quietly started looking at Vauxhall instead, where the boxy, familiar Cavalier was waiting with open arms and better lease rates. Rumours even circulated that Ford might bring the Cortina back from the dead just to stop the bleeding. The Sierra did eventually recover. Ford patched in a more conventional saloon version and rode out the storm, but the scare left a mark on the company that never really faded. Ford had learned the hard way that you could build something genuinely clever and still lose if you forgot who was actually going to be sitting in it every single day. So when it came time to replace the Sierra, Ford made a decision that bordered on reckless. They weren't going to build another British family car with a few tweaks for Europe. They were going to build one car, one platform, one set of engines, nearly identical specification, and sell it, largely unchanged, on both sides of the Atlantic. Internally, this was treated less like a facelift and more like a bet on the entire future of the company. The number attached to that bet was staggering. Ford poured something in the region of $6 billion into the project, dwarfing what they had spent on the outgoing Escort, and edging close to the biggest single development budget any car company had ever committed to a single model. This was not a company refreshing a product line. This was a company that had just come off a wave of job losses and shrinking market share, betting everything on one car being good enough to turn the whole business around. And they gave that bet almost 8 years to get right. Work on the car began as early as 1986, years before a single customer would ever sit inside one. At the centre of it was a Welsh engineer named Richard Parry-Jones, a man who a few years earlier had begged Ford's leadership to build the Sierra with a more modern front-wheel drive layout and been ignored. This time nobody ignored him. Parry-Jones became the car's chief engineer, and He brought in a rather unusual consultant to help sharpen the way it drove, Formula One legend Jackie Stewart. Between them, the Target wasn't just acceptable. It was a family car that could genuinely embarrass more expensive machinery on a twisting road without giving up an inch of the comfort a rep or a young family actually needed. They gave it a name that told you exactly how big they were thinking. Mondeo, drawn from the Latin root for world. Ford wasn't hiding the ambition. They were putting it on the badge. In November 1993, the Mondeo finally reached British roads. And almost immediately it did something the Sierra never managed. It made people forget the Sierra had ever been a problem. Just over 88,000 were sold in the UK in that first partial year alone. Enough to make it the 5th best-selling car in the entire country before it had even been on sale for 12 full months. By December of that year, it was outselling everything else in Britain, full stop. The following year, the judgment became official. The Mondeo was named European Car of the Year for 1994, beating out the Citroën Xantia and the Mercedes-Benz C-Class. A genuinely startling result for what was, on paper, just an ordinary Ford saloon competing against a Mercedes. Motoring journalists who climbed out of it kept using the same word, surprised. Nobody expected a family Ford to corner like this, to ride this well, to feel this composed. Ford's obsession with race on Sunday, sell on Monday, hadn't gone away either. That same year, New Zealand driver Paul Radisich took a Mondeo to victory at Brands Hatch, delivering Ford's 200th British Touring Car Championship win in the very same model families were now driving to the supermarket. For the first time in over a decade, Ford had a family car that nobody was embarrassed to be seen in, and Britain was about to fall completely in love with it. Through the mid-1990s, the Mondeo didn't just sell, it became something closer to a national shorthand. It was the car in the company car park. It was the car outside the semi-detached house with 2 kids and a mortgage. It was, in the truest sense, ordinary, and that ordinariness became its entire identity. Which is exactly why, in October 1996, a rising politician reached for it to describe an entire generation of voters. Tony Blair, addressing the Labour Party conference that spoke of a self-employed electrician he'd once met while out canvassing, a man who'd bought his council house, worked hard and drove a Ford. Blair needed to win voters exactly like him if Labour was ever going to take power again after nearly 2 decades in opposition. The press ran with it instantly. Mondeo Man became the defining phrase of the entire 1997 election, a shorthand for hard-working, aspirational Britain that every political commentator in the country adopted overnight. When Blair won that election in a landslide, more than one newspaper joked that a Ford estate had achieved something not even a tank could manage, and it had helped bring down a government. It's hard to overstate how strange that is. A car, a fairly ordinary, mid-market family estate, had become so culturally load-bearing that it shaped the language of a general election. No advertising department could have planned that, it simply happened, because the car had embedded itself that deeply into ordinary British life. The sales numbers backed up the mythology. By 2001, British buyers were taking home somewhere close to 87,000 Mondeos in a single year, the peak of its entire run in this country. It had, by this point, sold roughly 5 million units worldwide, with Britain standing as its single biggest market on the planet. Ford kept refining it too, rolling out a heavily reworked second generation in 2000 with a more grown-up, almost Germanic interior, and later adding genuinely quick V6-powered ST versions for anyone who wanted their family estate to double as something closer to a sports saloon. And then, almost as if the universe wanted to seal the car's cultural credentials permanently, it turned up in the most unlikely place of all, a Bond film. When Daniel Craig made his debut as 007 in Casino Royale in 2006, it was a Ford Mondeo that appeared on screen. Product placement that quietly confirmed what everyone in Britain already suspected: this ordinary estate car had somehow become part of the national furniture, right alongside spies and elections, and Sunday football. For a car built to fix an embarrassing mistake, the Mondeo hadn't just succeeded, it had become something close to unkillable. Except it wasn't, because somewhere, underneath all of that success, the ground was already shifting quietly enough that almost nobody noticed at the time. The first crack wasn't really about the Mondeo at all. It was about what British buyers wanted a family car to look like. Through the 2000s, a new type of vehicle began creeping into driveways, taller, boxier, marketed less as sensible transport and more as a lifestyle statement. SUVs and crossovers offered buyers something the Mondeo, for all its European Car of the Year pedigree, simply couldn't fake: the sense of commanding the road rather than blending into it, and crucially, they didn't cost that much more to run than a big family estate. At the same time, Ford's other flank was being quietly overrun. The premium German brands that the Mondeo had once genuinely rivaled in a road test, BMW, Audi, Mercedes, started making their entry-level models more attainable through cheap finance deals, right at the exact price point where a top-spec Mondeo used to sit unchallenged. Suddenly, a rep who once proudly took the keys to a Mondeo Gear could lease a badge that looked better on the driveway for barely any more money. The Mondeo found itself squeezed from both directions at once, priced out of prestige by the Germans above it, and priced out of practicality by the SUVs beside it. Sales didn't collapse overnight, they just kept sliding, year after year, in a decline so gradual that it barely registered as news. Where the Mondeo had sold nearly 90,000 units a year at its absolute best, it slipped into the tens of thousands. Then further still, as an entire generation of British buyers who would once have automatically gone for a Mondeo instead walked straight past it toward a Qashqai or a Cougar. By 2020, the numbers told a story that would have been unthinkable at the car's peak. British buyers took home roughly 2,400 Mondeos that entire year, a car that had once sold 36 times that number annually in this same country to these same kinds of buyers. Ford themselves put it plainly when asked why. Customer preference had simply moved, decisively and permanently, away from big family saloons and estates, and toward SUVs and crossovers. It wasn't a scandal. It wasn't a recall or a failure. It was simply a car that Britain had almost, without noticing, stopped wanting. In March 2022, Ford quietly confirmed what the sales figures had been predicting for years. The Mondeo would end production for the European market entirely. There was no farewell tour, no commemorative final edition with a special badge and a limited production run, the way manufacturers usually send off a beloved model. The last one simply rolled off the line, and that was that. And in a detail that says almost everything about how this story ends, the very same factory that built those final Mondeos did not shut down or sit empty afterward. It shifted straight over to building more units of the Cougar, Ford's own SUV, the exact type of vehicle that had spent the last decade quietly eating the Mondeo's market share from underneath it. The car that had decided a British general election was retired, and the factory that built it turned immediately to producing the thing that had killed it. It's a strange, almost poetic kind of ending for a car that once meant this much. No scandal, no crash, no dramatic final chapter, just a quiet fade until the thing that made headlines and helped decide governments simply stopped being made, and almost nobody outside the industry press even noticed. So here's the honest question worth sitting with. Was the Mondeo actually a failure? Or did it do exactly what it was built to do for 3 decades, better than almost anything else on the road, and simply run out of road when the entire country's taste changed underneath it? Because 5 million sales worldwide, a European Car of the Year trophy, a Bond film appearance, and a genuine role in the language of British politics is not the record of a car that failed. It's the record of a car that succeeded so completely for so long that its eventual disappearance barely made a ripple. If you're old enough to remember one on your own street, or you had a family member who swore by theirs, you'll know exactly what's been lost here. Not a bad car being quietly put out of its misery, but a genuinely great one, done in by nothing more dramatic than changing fashion. Do you remember your own Mondeo, or your parents', or the one that used to sit outside next door? What made you notice it had disappeared? Was it a Bond film rerun, an old photograph, or simply realizing you hadn't seen one on the motorway in years? Let me know in the comments, because I genuinely like to hear it. And if you want to see what else Britain built brilliantly and then quietly let slip away, there's a lot more of that story waiting for you on this channel. Subscribe and I'll see you in the next one.